Okay, here we're going to look at the concept of skill in the game and hands. We didn't really go into skill at all in the character creation section, mostly because I was wanting to just show you how you're using the cards, and skill kind of follows on from that afterwards. When you're actually looking to see how skilled a character is in something, you can take their elements as a basic level of skill competency that you can divide up amongst specific skills for the character. So you'd think about what occupation they are, what their background might be, and let's say that they had a set number of points of a particular element. You could then assign particular amounts of that to skills, up to 4 points for any skill. That's for individual ones, and you take that from the score of the element. So if you had an air element of, say, 10, like the character that we created, then you could have a number of skills up to a value of 4 from that score of 10. So let's say you could have 2 at 4, and then 1 at 2 or 2 at 1, just taking you up to 10 points in total, and you decide what those are. So let's say that the character was going to be skillful in say a particular subject, perhaps they're very, very skilled at science, and you've decided that that's one of their ones that they've got at 4. When they come to do some form of task involving something that they're skilled in this case science, they could resort to using their hand. That's instead of a card draw. So instead of using card draws like I demonstrated in the combat system, you can fall back on 4 cards that you draw when you begin play. This becomes your hand. Now, that level of 1 to 4 points for skill refers directly to these 4 cards. Let's say you have a skill of 2. That would enable you to use either of these 2 cards in a situation where you're resolving a task instead of drawing one. So you don't draw from the pack, you just go straight to using one of these 2 cards. It would be your choice which you use, and you can pre-plan that. You can have a look and you can think about the values that you've got in your hand and what the meanings of the cards are, and then when they seem best for you to play, most appropriate for the tasks that you're going to be doing, then you could decide which you wanted to use. When you use them, they work exactly the same way as shown in the combat section where you're drawing a card. It's just you've had the ability to choose instead. Now, once you've used a card, let's say they're going to use this card, the death card. We won't go into the actual meanings and use of the card. This is just really as a quick example. So they've used the death card. That has been used for a task. They now have 3 cards. These 2 move to the left, and you draw another one from the pack and add it on the end. Keep the orientation because it's still important whether they're day or night cards. You now have a new position, and this card has suddenly arrived in that section for the skill of 2. Obviously, there is an aspect of this where sometimes what you're doing is you're using a bad card just to get rid of it, to get other cards coming in. So occasionally it actually helps to not do that well with something. That's kind of like doing a sort of developmental stage. You'll find in extended tasks where you're doing something over a period of time that you'll be doing a series of card draws to try and beat a task value, and you add them up as you go. And sometimes just using cards up from your hand like that can be quite a good strategy in there. It helps a little towards the task, but it doesn't necessarily do anything bad for it, but it may bring in other cards that you can then use to complete the task more adequately. Obviously, if you have a high skill, you've got more choice. So if you had a skill of 4 in a particular area, then you'd have a choice of all 4 cards, and you could use any one of those. And again, it would just progress on the same way, replacing from the right and moving everything to the left. It's very straightforward again. characters can hang on to their hand for a game session, and then if you have a new game session, then they just draw a new hand at the beginning of play. So you can have that visible for other players to see if you want, and in fact when we've played it as a group, we've often done that, and in fact collaborated with each other in interpreting the cards and even suggesting ones to play. No harm in doing that, it's perfectly fine. You can decide to conceal hands or if you wish, and of course you can hold them in your hand literally, as long as you keep the orientation and the cards in the same order, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to have them spread out in front of you all of the time. And in fact, to be honest, you probably want a bit of table space sometimes for doing card spreads or for putting other paperwork and so on when you're playing. But that's basically hands for the game.